Greetings, folks. What follows is what should have been a video, what was supposed to be a video, on Worms World Party Remastered. Unfortunately, I don't know what it is about that game, but capturing it is a nightmare. I wanted to show the poor performance, but using shadow play actually resulted in it capturing at 640 by 480, even though the game was claiming to be running at 1080p. So I imagine there's something going on there, but whatever the case, I wasted a couple of hours gathering footage only to realize it's all bloody useless. Great! I hate that game even more now. So, you know what? I'm just putting the audio out for free. You know, listen to the audio. Obviously, it's going to reference things that are on the screen that you can't see, but you're going to get the idea anyway. So, what follows is what would have been a video entitled, Let's Not Play Worms World Party Remastered. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit. No, that's not an editing mistake. No, I didn't screw up in Adobe Premiere. No. That's the resolution of the menus of Worms World Party Remastered, as released on July the 16th of 2015 on Steam and GOG, developed by Team 17. Yes, supposedly the original team behind Worms World Party. Those classics, you know, everybody loves Worms, right? Worms, Worms 2, Worms United, Worms Armageddon, Worms World Party, and then things started to get a little bit silly. But regardless, I used to love Worms back in the day. I was kind of interested to see what would happen with a remastered version of Worms, and they promised many things. For instance, they promised 1080p 60 FPS. Well, this is not 1080p. Not at all. No. Let me just blow it up and show you exactly what it looks like on my monitor. Yeah. Ugh. Stretched and horrible, doesn't it? Yeah, it doesn't look good at all. And of course it wouldn't, because the menus for this are in 640 by 480. They're also running at ridiculous levels. I mean, ludicrous speed. Uncapped frame rate. At least I suppose that's a little bit promising for the game. They also promise, of course, that the game runs in 60 frames per second. And Worms is a game that would benefit a little from that. You know, it is still a turn-based action game for the most part, so it's certainly not one of those games that's massively affected by a low frame rate, but it's always nice. You know, I've said it time and time again, there are no games that would not at least benefit in some way from a 60 FPS or higher function. All of them. Absolutely all of them. Even if it's purely cosmetic, in the rare cases like something like Jackbox Party Pack, everything would benefit at least a little bit. But I'm not going to go too far into that today. You already know my opinions on frame rate. What I'm going to go into is what, as far as I'm concerned, is a case of false advertising. And that's pretty ugly. That's the sort of thing that we don't see a great deal of on the Steam store, and it's news when it happens. So, Worms World Party Remastered promises 1080p 60 FPS. Now, just to make you absolutely aware of the rig that is being used to get this footage, this is a 5930K with 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM and 2 Titan X's. And we're not running both of them, because obviously this is not going to support SLI. I mean, why would it? That's ludicrous. Why would it need to? It's Worms. I mean, it's bloody Worms. You might as well ask why Farmville doesn't support SLI. So we're running at a 1 card. And this is what we get. So as you can see in the corner, I'm running my MSI Afterburner stats. Why I'd need to on Worms? Usually I wouldn't. I mean, common sense would dictate that this game would run just fine. It doesn't. It can't maintain 60 at 1080p on a rig like this. And if you think that's bad, then oh, it's a lot worse for others. Others are reporting that they're getting way, way lower frame rates. In fact, I initially got about 35 frames per second when the game defaulted to 2560 by 1440, which is my native monitor resolution. That's not 4K or anything like that, but frankly, even if it was, it's Worms. Worms. It's not The Witcher 3, it's Worms. I'm pretty sure we can handle that. No, we can't, because this is what it looks like at 2560 1440, and these are the stats. Yeah, about 35 to 40 frames per second. What the hell did they do? I think more to the point, what didn't they do, by the looks of it here? They certainly haven't made any efforts to optimize. Now, there are certain reasonable expectations I think you could make when it comes to a remaster, and there are certain things that you can say, okay, well, it's fair that they're not doing this because this game is ancient. Is it fair to expect, say, multi-threading in a remaster? Well, here's the thing. You shouldn't need it, because it's Worms. Now, 1 core from this CPU is more than enough to handle a game like Worms. Absolutely, without a doubt. You'll see on the stats that this game is munching down on one of the cores and ignoring all the others. You'll also see the GPU usage. Yeah, about 5%. So, needless to say, the graphics card isn't even breaking a sweat. And yet, still, we're getting really poor frame rates for a game that was, needless to say, released 15 years ago. You could expect performance optimizations for modern systems in a remaster. I don't expect it to be running all 6 cores or anything like that, that's unreasonable, but I can expect it to run well on modern systems. Especially when Worms Armageddon, which by the way continues to receive beta patches primarily from 2 programmers by the name of Dead Code and Cyber Shadow, runs a hell of a lot better than this, and it's almost essentially the same game. I mean, it runs on the same engine, uses exactly the same assets. World Party, even at the time, was viewed as more of an expansion pack than a complete release. It's like, alright, well, this is just like Worms Armageddon, and yes, it was. No real doubt about that. But Worms Armageddon continues to have a fairly vibrant community as a result. This game is dead on arrival, and I can hardly blame people for that, because there is so little effort put into this remaster. They're asking $15 for it, which is ridiculous. What have you added? Apparently they remastered the audio. I barely noticed, I'm going to be honest, and frankly, I like the original audio more. I think a lot of us want a nostalgia trip from Worms, and they're looking for the original. Yes, it's got controller support, but it doesn't have any key rebinding. That's bonkers! I mean, most people aren't going to want to play this with controller, I would imagine, because it was designed for keyboard and mouse initially. Yeah, it runs fine on a controller. I remember playing World Party on the Dreamcast. It was fine on a controller, absolutely, but I would prefer to play it, especially on maps and game modes that have a lot of different weapon types, with a mouse and keyboard. It just works better. It's easier to navigate the menus. But I can't rebind the keys. That's ridiculous. They added Steam leaderboards and cloud saves. Yes, because we need cloud saves for Worms World Party Remastered. I imagine that most people at this point would want to play this in multiplayer. Well, I've got bad news for you. It doesn't have Steam matchmaking, which again, I think is a pretty reasonable expectation from a remaster on Steam. I think that's okay. That's the sort of thing that you can reasonably expect as a consumer to be implemented. Is it? No. I mean, even worse, the game doesn't have direct TCP IP connection options. So even if you had the IP address of your friend, it wouldn't make a difference because you don't have the option to connect that way anyway. No, you have 2 options. You've got LAN support, which of course is ultimately almost useless for practically everybody these days. And yes, you could use it, for instance, with something like Hamachi to emulate the LAN and connect that way. But otherwise, you are required to use WormNet. Now, WormNet only has 1 server based in the UK, so I hope you enjoy the ping if you happen to not be from around there. And nobody's playing it. Like, there are 10 people in WormNet. I'd love to show you WormNet, but I'm not going to risk it because WormNet shows your IP address. Now, you might wonder why that's a problem. Well, it's a problem because you're releasing this game in the age of streamers. As in, people that stream their game to a large audience. You're showing an IP address. As in, you are giving people a direct attack vector for a DDoS. That shows an obscene lack of foresight. This wouldn't be an issue 15 years ago, when the game actually came out, but it's not 15 years ago. It's 2015, and Twitch is a thing. Twitch exists. You don't show the user's IP address. Ever. That's a terrible idea. I could maybe understand it if it actually had some practical purpose, but as I mentioned, the game doesn't have TCP IP direct connection functionality anyway, so there's no reason to show that information. You don't need it. So what have we got so far? 640 by 480 menus, so they didn't even bother to remaster that. Terrible optimization that can't maintain a stable 60 FPS on a monster rig and drops down to about 35 to 40 at higher than 1080p resolutions. Basically no remastering whatsoever in terms of graphics. We've just got slight audio upgrades here and there. No Steam matchmaking. No TCP IP connection. WormNet is dead and doesn't even work properly anyway. And a few minor issues, like say for instance, if you're running multi-monitor and you're in the menu, you can move your cursor out of the menu onto the other monitor because it doesn't constrain properly, because of course it doesn't, and you can't get the cursor back in. So you've got to actually alt-tab the game and click back into it in order to continue to use it. So not only does it not constrain properly, but it doesn't even work when you try and move your cursor back to the game menu. Now, remasters and HD re-releases, I think, are something that I'm eventually going to do a full video on, because they run the gamut from excellent, like, say, Homeworld Remastered, and yes, I know some people didn't like the changes to Homeworld 1, but I was totally fine with it. I thought it was a fantastic remaster. And really great stuff like, say, Last of Us on PlayStation 4, which has a 60 FPS option, which made the game infinitely more enjoyable. And then absolute dreck like the Silent Hill HD collection, which completely ruined the game. Things like Zone of Enders HD, which didn't run very well at all. The recent Prototype release on PlayStation 4, in which Prototype 2 ridiculously runs worse than it does on PS3. And now Worms World Party Remastered, which absolutely does not deserve the title at all. What remastering has gone on here, exactly? You put in a resolution tweak. You apparently unlocked the frame rate but forgot to optimize the game so that it could run at a stable 60 FPS on a computer that's far, far more powerful than would ever be required in order to run it. This is a cheap cash grab. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, and frankly, it's not going to stand on Steam because we have Steam refunds now. You think people are really going to stand for this? You think people are going to load into their first game and say, oh, wow, yeah, that's really great. I am sure very glad that I purchased this. This was totally worth the title of remaster and my $15. If I haven't made my point clear enough yet, let me just spell it out. Don't. This is absolutely awful. If this was just them releasing this game in its original form on Steam, I can at least understand that, because the level of expectation is going to be lower. It's like, okay, it runs like the original. Fine. Whatever. But that's not what they claimed, is it? This is what they claimed. Imagine taking the perfect online gaming experiences and one of the most popular Worms games ever made, adding a touch of Steam achievements, leaderboards, cloud saves, full controller support, a little sprinkle of 1080p 60 FPS, and you have Worms World Party Remastered. The perfect online gaming experience. Really? Through a 15-year-old lobby system that doesn't work and doesn't have anybody in it to play games with to begin with? Right. Yeah, okay. 1080p 60, except you'll never get that. I don't think there's really anything else to say. This is a terrible remaster and absolutely should not be rewarded with your money. Hopefully Team 17 gets its act together, but somehow I doubt it. They knew exactly what they were releasing. This was hardly a surprise to them. If you want to play Worms these days, you're better off with Armageddon. Trust me, you are better off with Armageddon. Ah, blech. Horrible, disgusting, disgraceful, a farce. I'll see you next time.